I'm sure there'll be lots of good, juicy questions in Q&A coming up. All right, so our next speaker, we were going to have a creative expression from Silda from Sanat. Unfortunately, she was unwell, so couldn't go ahead. But we do have an amazing speech coming up. Well, let me not make him feel too stressed about the expectation level, but I think it's a really interesting topic and very topical given the news of the past week, what happened in Sydney with the stabbing. We have Dr. Riyad Rahimullah, who will be speaking to us about the intersection between mental health and terrorism. So, Dr. Riyad Rahimullah was born and bred in Brisbane. He's son of the late Imam Rahimullah. He completed his bachelor's degree in psychology, graduating with first-class honours. He then went on to complete his PhD investigating the prevalence and correlates of radicalised thinking in Muslim adolescents in Islamic schools. In this research, he investigated how issues such as racism, identity, and integration were related to radicalised thinking, such as takfir, suicide bombing, other forms of violence towards non-Muslims, and support for ISIS. This was the first research of its kind in Australia in an adolescent sample. Dr. Riyad Rahimullah has served the Muslim community in various capacities. Over the years, he was president of the Muslim Students Association of the University of Queensland, formerly employed in youth and community development, and a Quran and Islamic studies tutor or teacher to school-aged children. He's also been a university tutor and lecturer in psychology, in different areas of psychology, and he currently works as a senior research officer at Relationships Australia, Queensland. His dream job would be, any guesses? A soccer player. No, I'm joking, he wasn't a soccer player. I was hoping someone would say a soccer player, but no one did. Okay, an astrophysicist. So don't ask him any questions about that on the panel because that could lead into a very long discussion. Right. Okay. All right. Now this topic is super topical. As we know from the past week, we saw everyone rushing to try and say, was this a Muslim, not a Muslim? Then saying, oh, no, he's not Muslim, he's mentally ill. And then people saying, oh, you're not supposed to say he's mentally ill because that's stigmatising mentally ill people. And it raised so many issues that we probably haven't had a chance to unpack fully. And so this is a wonderful opportunity. Please welcome Dr. Riyad to the stage.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulil Kareem. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa ahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Distinguished Imams, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can't quite see my audience up here because of the light. This is not my slide. Yes, that's me. Okay. In 2014, man Harun Monis was gunned down after laying siege to the Lynn Cafe in Sydney. He was thought to have narcissism, paranoia, and antisocial disorder. In 2015, Farhad Jabbar was gunned down after opening fire outside the Parramatta police station. He reportedly had depressive symptoms and mental health issues. In 2018, Hassan Khalif Shireh Ali attempted to ignite a car bomb at Melbourne's Bourke Street Mall. He was reportedly suffering from delusions. All these incidents of terrorism occurred in the suspicion of mental illness. So, is there a link? Does mental illness cause terrorism? Inshallah tonight I'd like to shed some insight onto that topic, Before I do though, I have a live poll. I'd like everyone to take out their phones and see what you think. What do you think is the relationship between mental illness and terrorism? That's at ztings.com/AUS. So A, mental illness causes terrorism on its own. B, mental illness causes terrorism in combination with other factors. C, mental illness is associated with terrorism but not a cause. And D, mental illness is not related to terrorism at all. I'll give you guys another 30 seconds. Interesting. So nobody thinks it's a cause on its own, and then there's an even kind of distribution amongst the other three. Okay, we've settled this, I'll move on, inshallah. No, it's still going? 10 seconds? Alright, bismillah. So some statistics, first of all. There is a distinction between the type of terrorist when it comes to mental illness. In one sample of Western terrorists, mental illness was 13.5 times more likely to be present in lone actors than group-based terrorists. So by lone actors, I mean an individual that acts on his own with no official link to a terrorist organization, even though he might do it in their name. In another study, 40% of lone actors had a diagnosed mental disorder. What kind of disorders are we talking about? Well, some diagnoses are significantly higher among terrorists than in the general population. These include schizophrenia, delusional disorder, and autism spectrum disorder, although that's technically not a mental illness, but the scholars, they include that in the category. There are some diagnoses that are roughly par on par with the general population, and those might include bipolar disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. And then there are some mental illnesses that are underrepresented in terrorist samples and more so represented in the general population, such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety disorder. So this is based on one study alone. So the stats will fluctuate, and it also will depend on the geographical region you're in as well. Okay, underneath the C it says underlying explanations, if you can see that. One of the underlying explanations that we could posit is the idea of having delusions. So an individual who becomes a terrorist might have delusions of grandiosity. He thinks he's somebody. He might believe Allah sent him on a divine mission. He said it to him straight to his face or in a dream. He wants recognition from this as well sometimes, because they have that delusion that they're bin Laden or they're even the messenger of God. Na'udhu billah. We also have other kind of delusions as well, such as the delusions of persecution. So the individual from Burke Street, he reported having delusions that unseen people were chasing him with spears. It is possible that he did not want to do what he did, but because of this persecution, this deluded persecution, he was driven in that direction. We also find that some individuals who are terrorists with mental illnesses, they have single issue ideologies. So they don't prescribe to the broad spectrum of issues that ISIS and Al-Qaeda are on about. They have single issues, narrowly focused to one thing. And what has been posited is that this is related to a grievance of theirs. So there's a theory that the Lind Cafe terrorists had a grievance with the Channel 7 Sunrise News Studio, which is across the road from Lind Cafe. Because of that grievance, this might be why he chose that location. It's one theory. In the case of schizophrenia, we have symptoms of impulsivity and reactive violence. But in other cases, it can be a very rational decision to engage in terrorism. They are capable of sophisticated plots and executing them as well as anyone would if they didn't have a mental illness at all. Risk factors. Risk factors are not causes. They just happen to be present amongst terrorists with mental illness. They could be present amongst others too, who aren't terrorists or who haven't got mental illness, but they are risk factors. They are present. We find in the case of schizophrenia, there is a history of crime and violence. Aside from that, we have parents being divorced, or the spouse subscribes to a broader terrorist movement. There is also the observation of stress and strain. So the individual might be in chronic stress or elevated stress, not necessarily more than the typical individual would face, but they're not able to handle it as well. They're more susceptible to it, negatively affected by it. They lack social support as well because they are socially isolated, so they aren't regulated in that fashion. This stressor can be proximal as well. So in one study, of the 33% of lone actors who were impacted by stresses, 3 out of 4 experienced those stresses within 12 months preceding the attack. Other incidents might be a prejudice in the build-up to the attack, being a victim of prejudice. Final message. So does mental illness cause terrorism? If you've been paying really close attention, I haven't answered that question. Mental illness is associated with terrorism. We've found that tonight. But there is no empirical evidence that says mental illness causes terrorism. There is no psychopathological profile. There is no model or theory that has been devised and tested to say mental illness causes terrorism. Could it? In some cases it could, but we can't say that as a firm conclusion or a general conclusion. I want to touch on 2 points quickly as well before I finish. First of all, the issue of mental illness and terrorism is not an exclusively Muslim problem. We can recall back to 2011 in Norway, where an individual who claimed to be a cultural Christian, far right, committed 2 terrorist atrocities. 77 people killed, hundreds injured. He had paranoid schizophrenia. Finally, when we are talking about mental illness in the presence of terrorism, we are talking about a fraction of a percent. There are 25% of Australian adults who have some kind of diagnosed mental illness as we speak. We can't begin to stigmatize that large percentage of the population because we have some incidents. We are talking about a fraction who happen to be terrorists, a fraction of whom who happen to be lone actors, a fraction of whom who happen to have mental illness. So inshallah, I've hopefully been able to shed some light on this issue. We can engage more in the question and answer session. Thank you.